and we are here to talk about something incredibly important to not just our daily lives, but to the world around us, and that is marketplaces, food, and food tech as a whole. There's so much to talk about in these industries and how they relate, how the digitization of 2020 and looking ahead has played a role and impacted the way that we think about these, the way that we use these, and the way that these industries will look for the decade ahead. And we're here to talk just about that. As we make the transition from Q3 to Q4 and sprinting even faster to the end of the year, what's changed with marketplaces? What has changed around food and our value chain on how the food gets processed to where it gets to our plates today? That's what we're here to find out. That's why we brought some of the greatest investors from around the world here to talk about all pieces of this value chain as well. But before we go ahead and get started and introduce everybody, a big thank you to you, our audience, for tuning in. If you like what you hear today, make sure you click subscribe. If you'd like to be on a show like today, do reach out as an investor. We'd love to find the right show for you, whether that be a technology, industry, or region around the world that you'd like to share your thoughts and insights. We'll find the right spot. And entrepreneurs, we're in that turn. A few days, only a few days until that sprint. In the last 3 months of the year in Q4, there is a virtual stage here on VCTV for you to pitch us as investors focused on your industry, along with our entire live audience. Your company, your product, your service. It's a great opportunity to not only meet individuals who are investing in your area, but also get real-time feedback and exposure for what you're building as well. So do reach out to the LA Token team and or myself, and we'll find the right spot for you. And a big thank you to the entire LA Token team and Emmanuel for making VCTV possible every single day. With that, again, I'm your host, Kyle Ellicott, and we're here to talk about marketplaces and food. And as we are here to talk about that, let's start introducing each and every one of our investors today to get you a little bit of intro and a little bit of background as to why they're here before we dive in. Julio, welcome to the show. A little intro, a little background, please.
Hi. Thank you all for inviting me and for organizing, of course, making this possible. Very nice to see you, Kyle, and look forward to our discussion. We are based in New York City. I don't know if the background tells that, but this is a different one still that I took last weekend, just at the from the rooftop of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. We're based in New York. We see various kinds of deals all year, but we would like to finish the year by focusing to the extent possible on food. We think that the virus has made it so that there's added emphasis on the food sector, and we also, we think not only is there added emphasis on the food sector, but there's a lot of innovation happening as a result of the added emphasis that funds are putting on the food sector. So it's a good time to be an entrepreneur and create some of the new products. We invest in many different types of companies. This is a list of our portfolio. As we move in the discussion, you can ask me about those different companies and I'll be happy to address them. But for now, I'm just very happy to be here. And thank you again for the invitation.
Absolutely. Happy to have you. And there's some good brands and also some great companies, innovative companies on that list we're excited to dive into. Brian, welcome back to the show as well. This is a big, huge focus area and favorite of yours. A little intro and a little background to our audience as to why.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Brian Hallweil. I'm based in Sag Harbor, New York, and also in New York City in the Hudson Valley of New York often. I work for a few different funds. Almanac Insights is a $30 million food chain venture fund based in New York City, founded by David Barber of Blue Hill and Stone Barns and Valerie Christie. We invest across the food chain from ag tech and farm automation technology all the way to grocery and CPG and everything in between, but only companies that we feel are having a transformative positive impact on the food system. That work is going well. As Julio said, it's an exciting time to be in the food sector, period. And in addition, I work for a company called Belltown Farms, which is a large-scale organic farm operator. And I've been leading their effort to find farmland in Columbia County to purchase and operate and grow organic commodities, from pinto and black beans to barley and corn and soy. And then I also I co-direct a CPG accelerator based on Kauai in Hawaii. So we invest in very early stage early to middle stage Hawaii-based, Hawaii-grown food and beverage businesses. So across the board, just sort of looking to support food and beverage entrepreneurs and grow better supply chains.
Wonderful, and welcome back. It's a pleasure to have you. I know there's a lot for us to talk about in this, but before we do, Gary, welcome back to the show. It's a pleasure to see you. A little intro and a little background for everybody.
Yeah, it's been such a long time, Kyle. Anyhow, my name's Gary Fowler. Good to see you, Julio. Good to see you, Brian. So I'm a serial entrepreneur and investor. I've created 2 unicorns. I've said it many times here. I was on the original management team at Click Software. Company was exited about 13 months ago to Salesforce for a little over $1 billion. And I was the co-founder of Viva, which is one of the top HR tech companies. And because of COVID and other things, our business is dramatically up. It's a company that is near unicorn status today. And one of the billionaires, David Yang, is my partner in that company. And I just love AI. So for farm tech, growing up in rural Pennsylvania on the side of a mountain and being farmers. So we knew a little bit about it. But we like tech that involves being able to make our lives a bit better. So whether it's tractors with LiDAR or radar to be able to do self-driving within fields to be more efficient. I mean, we've got a challenge, right? The population of the world in the last 100 years has quadrupled. If that stays on course and we don't understand how to be able to grow better, faster, we've got a big problem. We're not going to be able to feed the planet. So we've got a whole lot of issues, and I'm into AI wherever AI is plays a role. I write a lot. I'm a Forbes writer. I've written now almost 80 articles in the last year. I do podcasts. I do a lot of, I do a lot. I'm building a $100 million fund too. And so it's an impact fund based out of Atlanta, Georgia. So that's what I'm doing.
Just a few things, like each of you, all playing multiple functions, multiple roles, all that are also channeling and focusing back on today's topic. And again, that's marketplaces and food or food technologies as well. And Julio, I would like to come and start with you first around what is currently happening. What has changed? Where are things at today around marketplaces and food tech? You've made some great investments in this space. Where are you seeing things as of?
First, I should have said that I'm with New York Bay Capital. That's the name of our company. It's where are we today? Well, we are in the middle of a lot of potential innovation around, number one, what is the food that we consume made of? I think it's no secret that a lot of research dollars and a lot of companies right now are investing in things like artificial meat, artificial chickens, artificial chicken meat to be more precise. Meatless meat, chickenless chicken, fishless fish. I think all of that is coming, and most of them are made of plants, right? So I think that in 20 years, people will look back at this time as a key time in the development of alternative foods, alternative sources of protein that are developed mostly from plants. And at the end of the day, what that means, it's from beans, right? Because beans is what is rather protein rich and at least flexible enough that you can do experimentation with beans, and through that you're able to then create various products. One of the new companies that I mentioned earlier, Keho, is in the business of making bars that have traditional flavors but don't contain those ingredients, specifically Keho. These are the bars, and that's the name. quejolife.com. They make bars that are savory, but the idea is to, you know, they have the pizza flavor, the Thai flavor, the Tex-Mex flavor, and the goal is to give the consumer the experience of, at least if they're not eating a pizza, at least something that tastes like a pizza, you know. But it's all made from plants. So it might be there might be a hint of pepperoni, but there isn't any pepperoni in the pizza. That's a big trend. Difficult to deny. I think, you know, very much playing along the lines of the vegan and, you know, other types of diets and lifestyles that have come up in the last few years, that have become popular, that have become mainstream. They're really no longer, you know, a small tiny piece of the population that that caters only to some, you know, specific products, but really society is absorbing this type of lifestyle, right? Which is considered also healthier. So that's one trend. I mean, the other trend, along the lines of what Gary was talking about, is advancements in agriculture and advancements in food production that make everything more efficient. And yes, we also know about those self-driving trucks that that pick up in fields. We very much back a fund called FoodTech, which has invested in that, FoodTech Ventures. It's a different fund, but there are friends. You know, any advancements in productivity at the farm level are immediately get adopted if they work. The large multinationals, like someone that I have here, you know, pictured, need, and in fact ought to even faster in the future adopt new technologies to become much more efficient in the production of bananas, in the production of, you know, anything agricultural. And even the company that I have on my upper over there, American Beef, you know, right? American Beef Operations, that is a company designed to not only process beef better, and that's actually real beef, but just process it in a better way that eliminates some of the problems that we have heard about on COVID, where the workers in a you know, in a beef plant were getting infected at higher rates than in other industries, and almost puts in danger our supply of beef because of that. So there are companies working and making beef production cleaner, you know, certifiably, you know, disease-free, you know, certifiably clean, and also more efficient, right? So I think those are the bigger trends.
I couldn't agree more. I think we're seeing a lot of that. We've talked about it here a lot on VCTV. But before we continue, Brian, to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts and insights furthering on Julio, as I know you have some crossover there, but I know you're seeing a lot of other things as well with some of your activities.
I would echo a lot of what Julio said. I think it's hard not to talk about plant-based protein, and as noted, it really gets back to a supply chain question. If any of these companies, whether it's Oatly and other oat-based dairy, or plant-based seafood, Impossible Foods, Beyond Meat rather, I mean, they depend on existing commodities, but they also depend on other commodities that haven't been used at scale. So, you know, this evolution has been pushing the yellow pea market and the pea protein market in America, which is growing rapidly. There's sort of a little bit of a movement away from soy, which has been our big plant protein. So there's now a lot of other alternatives that people are exploring, whether it's chickpea, whether it's mushroom-based mycelium protein, which Almanac has recently invested in 2 different companies. So I think we can't ignore that. For us, the major distinction we're concerned about and looking for is who can do this simply and with clean ingredients and not you know, an outrageous amount of processing and additives. If you look at, I would say both Beyond and Impossible, but especially Impossible, it's a very complicated ingredient label, and we don't see consumers chasing that for long. That's something that needs to improve. But I'm also excited about automation. And that's, both machines on the farm, but also better data-driven decision making. So we're seeing a lot in some of these large-scale B2B farmer platforms like Farmer Business Network and Indigo Ag. And some of these companies that essentially are offering farmers digital services, whether it's a premium on a crop of corn or sorghum for meeting certain environmental goals, or it's getting them a much better price on fertilizer and seed and tractor financing because they're on this large online marketplace. And that's fascinating because agriculture, again, it's our most essential industry, really the only industry we can't do without, still incredibly analog. And you think just of the transition of a grain farmer driving their crop to the local grain elevator, it's still a very analog experience with paper tickets changing hands, payment taking weeks, if not months, et cetera. So there's a lot of fintech companies coming in to streamline and digitize that entire process, which just unlocks all sorts of new functions, not just getting farmers faster payment and financing against future payments, but traceability and all sorts of data you couldn't really track with paper slips, changing hands. So that's exciting for us, both those areas.
And Gary, to you, what further are you seeing, whether it's coming in from some of your activities or from the artificial intelligence side, that's impacting the current state of things today?
Yeah, so I mean, it's just like across the board, right? So AI is a new electricity, but let me talk about things like farming as a service. So we've got some incredible technologies that come out. Look at a company called Winsect, YNSECT, that's using black soldier flies to change waste into protein. They just raised $125 million. So as we said, we've got a crushing problem that needs to be addressed. Then we've got, what about automated machinery, but not only automated machinery, but automated machinery with predictive capabilities. That's where this is going. I just talked to a company that's really on the cutting edge of they've tested their self-driving technology using a combination of several LiDAR, radar, et cetera, on tractors, working with they've just cut a deal with one of the largest tractor manufacturers to be able to go out and to be able to harvest in a much more efficient and effective way, right? When I was growing up as a kid in Pennsylvania, we had John Deere tractors and it wasn't any fun. In fact, we had to detassel corn and all those kind of things. But the technology, in order to provide the food, we need to have those technologies in place. And then the other thing is, last but not least, is really recycling food and not having so much waste. Think about how much waste is in the supply chain. It's crazy, right? And we need to be much more efficient. I just read Southeastern Grocers, by the way, talk about tech. Southeastern Grocers actually went down through on a food. This is like keep it simple, stupid. They've actually, in the summer, were buying turkeys because they're afraid of disrupted supply chain. So we better be able to predict demand a lot better and differently than we have done before. So, and they have Buy Low and Winn-Dixie, those kind of chains. So we're in the middle of this revolution, and we got to make sure that from a food tech side, we can make it. And then we're sure that we're able to deliver it to that grocer and it's fresh.
Mm-hmm. And Brian, quick question back to you. So now we've kind of gotten the current state. I want to bring up a subject we've talked about in the past, the Internet of Things, right? Connectivity. So as 5G starts to enter into the world and we have more sensors deployed throughout the world, but specifically on the agricultural side, how is that going to impact the supply chain or the value chain of how we get our food? If we've got more sensors in the farms, we've got more sensors on the equipment, we've got more sensors throughout the delivery process. What are the capabilities? What are the opportunities here? And Gary, I'll come to you afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, theoretically, it allows you to collect more information, share more information with the consumer, and sort of operate better. But that's theoretical because, of course, you need everyone in the supply chain to take action on this, and technology without execution doesn't do that much. I think there's huge potential for that to help reduce food waste, because one of the big sort of black box areas in the food chain is, when does food go bad? How, not just the best by date and, packed on date, but simply being a little bit more, not taking for granted that we can just let a certain share of the food supply get wasted, and sort of valuing or, raising the value of saving that food and putting it to some better use. And all that sort of data sensors in the supply chain, especially once you get into food distribution warehouses and grocery stores, and even from the farm, although I think there's other technologies that are going to be more useful in extending shelf life, reducing waste on the farm. Not all digital and sensors, but it just allows you to sort of easily trigger an alert for people who manage large amounts of food and hopefully reduce that waste. There's all sorts of talk about blockchain and sort of, the need to truly trace and track whether it's cocoa, chocolate from Africa, or coffee or anything. But I don't know if we really need that sort of Herculean. I defer to Gary and Julio. I don't know if we need that Herculean tech effort. Fairly simple tracking can also get us far ahead. I was looking at a company recently called Swim Systems, based in Denver, operate mostly in the American West. And they're sort of water use tracking and accreditation. So large farms that use a lot of public water for irrigation, they pay certain fees to the government. If they can show they've used less, they can save a lot of money. And there's not even much digital tech in the field. It uses existing water meters, which the farmer then feeds into the Swim platform. And they immediately get a report that, hey, Kyle, you only use 5,000 acre feet. You'll be getting a rebate check at the end of the year. So that's really exciting in terms of just making operations more efficient.
I could add a couple things there.
Sure.
I think that right now it's expensive to put sensors everywhere, right? So we're a little bit far from that, and like Brian says, it may not even be needed. However, at the greenhouse level, there are many things that are produced now in the open fields, in the vast open fields, and depending on rain and all of that, but that are really beginning to be produced mostly in greenhouses. In a greenhouse, you really do have such a controlled environment, and it's a smaller, obviously, operation, that every single output from that greenhouse has to be great, right? It has to be perfect. You should be able to control, virtually 100% of every tomato, every avocado grown in a greenhouse. So when the product is somewhat value added, and in this case, we may not even talk about tomatoes and possibly not even avocados, but I've seen a lot of interesting innovation in greenhouses in not in food, but in CBD, in cannabis, in cannabis oils, and the production, hemp and cannabis as used to then produce medicinal marijuana or CBD oils. There, because it's a very value-added product and it's very expensive, you need to really keep track of the quality. You could practically keep track of the quality of every leaf, and there's been a lot of advancement there in keeping track of all of the different variables. And this is important for two reasons. Number one, because you can always apply the tech once it's ready to larger scale operations. And number two, when we started talking about what are the trends today, if we had asked 20 years ago, what were the trends? I think people would have told us genetic modification. People would have said, in the future, everything is going to be genetically modified, and that's how it's going to be. The reality, however, is that genetic modification is if not dead, definitely has slowed down dramatically, right? It has a bad name now, and nobody wants GMO, and nobody wants any of those types of science happening. It's happening anyway, but it's no longer what it used to be. So when you cannot control the plant, when you cannot design a better plant from its genetics, and you can't control there, then all you can do is really start from the seed that you have and then control the way that the seed develops and how it travels through the production chain and gets to the consumer, by tracing, tracking, etc., and controlling, of course, how it's grown, which is where the greenhouses come in. So, I think that because there's a lot of R&D in those types of businesses, we are going to see that, naturally expand outwards and outdoors, just because it'll exist, and so it'll be easy to deploy.
I agree. And Gary, to you, anything else to add further on that?
The only, from my standpoint, look at the technologies that we have. We talked about the sensors in the field with 5G, and Julio's right. It's not going to be widely deployed yet, but it's going to happen, right? And the other thing is computer vision and drones, being able to have drones to be able to make some decisions, right? Not just collect the data, but this world is going to fundamentally change, and AI is going to be one part of it, but it's happening very, very, very quickly, actually. So, this digital transformation, it's an exciting time, and it's taken FoodTech by storm. And these incredible technologies, like I said, with that's Winsect, would be able to take the flies to be able to take waste and turn it into protein. Imagine that. And
so are we going to be eating flies in the future? Gary, is that what you're saying?
They're not going to call it flies.
Brian, I saw you on mute. Did you have a point to add on there?
I don't think I've eaten any flies yet. Actually, there was a company in Brooklyn that was making some really good insect-based sausages. I'm forgetting the name. Their stuff was great. They had mealworm and they had cricket. I don't know about the flies, but I definitely think there's going to be more insects in the diet. No question in my mind. I'm not a big powder drink person, but I do try a lot of stuff, and there's cricket protein showing up in a lot of those already, and energy bars and that sort of thing. Again, it's new, it's still very small, but I didn't know the company Gary mentioned, but there's a company in France called Y Insect that raised almost $300 million, and some very big strategic partners. Don't quote me, I can't recall if it's ConAgra or Cargill, but some large, maybe even ADM, some big suppliers who are poking around that to see, because essentially it's a biomass conversion effort, which they're already doing in some ways. And, the rise of also fermentation nearby. I mentioned a company that we invested in recently called Meaty, meat with an I at the end, and based in Boulder, and it's mycelium, rapid fermentation mycelium growth that is then transformed almost magically into something that looks and smells and feels like meat. I think we're still, we've gone beyond tofu and tempeh, which are still great plant-based meats. And I think, we didn't, what's old is new again. And those were great when they invented them hundreds or thousands of years ago. But what's really exciting about Meaty is it's very low cost. It essentially is done in fermentation vats like breweries and other food factories have. And very clean label. It's one ingredient, in addition to whatever seasoning you choose to put on it. So yeah, there's interesting stuff. But what I unmuted about was, as we just described, sensors are not that. The idea of putting sensors every acre across the United States, it's maybe not the best use of resources, and who would it be able to use all that data? And drones and sensors every 10 miles might be just as good, but I think this manifestation is not always predictable. I wrote a story a few years ago called The Rise of Small Farm Robots, that, the innovation in farm automation is not necessarily making a John Deere tractor, equipping that with GPS and sensors, and a lot of which already exists. And it does, allow the farmer to output a farm log and track what's happening in the fields. But there's a lot of cool innovation in very small farm machines that are totally autonomous. So I'll post the link to the article, but I wrote about a company in the Midwest called Robot, which is like an autonomous lawnmower that just goes between rows of corn. And the idea, although I don't know if it's reached commercialization yet, is you would essentially deploy a flock of these things in a cornfield. It can go where a giant tractor can't go. So it can do things that a big tractor just can't do, even the most cutting edge one. So I think there's, if we really think outside the box, automation may not be making large existing tractors and harvesters and combines smart. It might be thinking about automation in a very different way on the farm.
Well, and to that point, so I want to bring up two things. One, Oatly is being rumored to go public here, so just showing more and more of that demand for alternative food or plant-based foods as well. I think it's about a 5 billion US IPO that they're targeting based on what I've seen in the news, which is super exciting. And thank you, Brian, for sharing that article. I'll share that in the show notes here afterwards with everybody for the reading. But with that being said, and even what you're mentioning, diligence. So aside from the typical diligence and things that we look for in a company, when you're looking at a business that's building in the alternative food space, what are you looking for? What should investors be mindful of outside of the normal, right? Team, product, what should they be really looking for or keep an eye out when looking on the diligence side of these types of companies? Because there is science to this, right? There are supply chain pieces that play a role, and maybe not everyone is an expert in those areas. So what would you give as advice for people to look at on the diligence side if they're looking at these companies? We'll start with Brian and then we'll come around.
I mean, quickly, there's a premium, and I learn a lot of this from my colleagues at Almanac who have deep roots in grocery, working with Whole Foods for many years, not to mention, grocers in the New York metro area. There's a real premium now on good margins and being able to show some profitability, not waiting years and years to reach profitability. You have to show that you can thrive during a pandemic and also in non-pandemic peacetime scenarios. I think those are actually, two of the large, and I guess the last thing I would say is some level of technological flexibility and tech forwardness. But you don't see that much. If someone is going out to raise money, even early stage, I think they've done their own diligence and thought about what are the tech needs that they have to make their operation more efficient.
I could add something to that. I put out
Sure.
my companies here because Just sitting there, I think it's, well, I don't know if it's to my right or to my left, but Just makes, well, it started by making, I guess what we could call fake eggs or egg substitutes, eggs that are not made of eggs. And because you mentioned
and
the
mayo
IPO,
and mayonnaise
And
as
mayo,
well.
yep.
Yes,
Their
and
Just mayo is one of my favorite products.
Correct. They're going to go public. That's no, that's, and we're wishing them the best of luck there. We are actually involved, and to a large extent, we've seen the kind of due diligence that potential participants in the IPO are going to do, together with their advisors. And I think that the kinds of questions that we're getting as advisors to Just are, number one, of course, the profitability, right? The numbers. I think investors in Just and future investors in Just want to see a company in general go public with sales of at least $100 million in order to get a reasonable large valuation, the kind that would justify the type of R&D that has gone in, and the profitability, so, which begins with sales, right? Sales, and then is a product profitable, right? Luckily, the product, in theory, should be cheaper than eggs, even though it could potentially be priced at around the same level, per egg. So I think there they do fine. The second issue is distribution. How easily and how scalable is your technology? Because whenever you're doing anything new, there's always an issue of how much can you produce of it quickly. Chickens have a way of reproducing themselves, and then obviously laying a lot of eggs, right? So scaling in the chicken farm, and you can ask Mr. Purdue and all those big players in chickens and in eggs, is not that difficult to achieve or has already been achieved. But what you have is a technology that depends on certain inputs, in this case beans mostly, to produce the end product. Scalability is a question. How quickly can you scale whatever it is that you are talking about? And then finally, you've got the whole consumer acceptance that people are asking. Is the consumer going to accept in large enough scale the products? Finally, there would be what else is coming out, right? What after mayo? What after the eggs? First, it was a carton that you could just pour and kind of make yourself an omelet. So you can buy a Just that comes in a carton like that. Then they came up with omelets that are ready to eat, so they can be sold frozen and already pre-cooked with the material that isn't eggs, but it's an omelet, and you can add already you'll have it all with your peppers and your various different things people like to add to their omelets, tomatoes. Freeze it and sell that, and they're able to sell that already through fast food. But what comes next? And I think what comes next in their future is chicken meat, chickenless chicken meat. And what they're doing for that is the concept of growing cells, taking chicken cells, but instead of using a chicken to develop the chicken cells, you do it all like out in a lab, where you're basically feeding the cells whatever food they need, whatever nutrients they need, whatever environment they need to develop into chicken cells, into chicken meat cells, without them having to go through the problem of being part of a chicken and then having to kill the chicken.
So just real quick, Julio,
so
because we're
that's a
almost
real
at time.
question, Okay, sorry
Yeah,
about
so
that.
I thought no, please,
It's
no
future
apologies.
R&D. Yeah, go ahead.
That's exactly what I was about to sum up for you. So you're talking about the future R&D, the product roadmap, customer buy-in, and that scalability factor, right? These are very key core things that people need to be looking for if they're looking at these investments, in addition to what Brian mentioned, and then also what you would look at for a typical company as well. But gentlemen, we are here close to time at the lightning round, so I want to come around to everyone for closing thoughts, and also where can the audience find you to continue the conversation? So Gary, let's come to you in terms of closing thoughts. Anything else to add? And then, of course, where can everyone find you and that exciting show, that top show of yours as well, to tune in?
Yeah. Thanks, Kyle. So, from my standpoint, it's all about the data. I love data, and I love artificial intelligence and what we can do with the data to make our lives a bit better. So from my standpoint, it's all about the data. GSD Venture Studios, Get Shit Done Venture Studios is my company, and we're a unicorn breeder. That's what we do, and we've done it several times. So that's where we are. Yes, I have a show. It's GSD Presents Silicon Valley AI and Tech. I just had Guy Kawasaki on it last week. It was a very, very interesting show. I've got, stay tuned, I have one of the top executives from Intel talking about smart cities and IoT next. So Gary Fowler on LinkedIn, be happy to talk to you, and I appreciate it, Kyle. It's great. Thanks.
Thank you. Brian, to you. Closing thoughts, where can everyone find you online?
Well, I'd love to continue the conversation with these guys. And it's interesting that Julio mentioned cultured meat. I thought he described it very well. And it's an area we're watching. And there was a report that came out recently. Well, it was a PitchBook article saying we were still 2 or 3 years out. And that was interesting in my mind, because I think that's a little longer than some people think. But I remember when they were saying 5 to 7 years out. So it has become shorter. And yeah, that's curious. But again, you have to think about what you're growing everything on. So will it be corn? Will it be sugar cane? Will it be soldier flies? I don't know. But yeah, please reach out on LinkedIn. Look forward to staying in touch.
Absolutely. And Julio, close us out. Quick closing thoughts, and where can everyone find you online?
Well, everybody can find us at newyorkbaycapital.com or nybaycapital.com for short, if you prefer. I just posted in the chat my personal email, and I'm on LinkedIn. And on behalf of all of us at New York Bay Capital, because there are many of us partners and everyone else, Thank you for the invite. I mean, closing thoughts is just that this is a very exciting place to be. And if anybody has a great idea, or you think you have a good idea as an entrepreneur, we'd love, no company is too small. The bars that I discussed, you know, it's a absolute startup. Obviously, our other companies like Del Monte are huge, but you have not only in me, but in Brian and in Gary, guys that clearly know what they're talking about. And so you should have, if you prepare your materials well and you have something interesting to say, I think you're going to have you know, great reception by a whole number of venture capitalists that are looking for innovation. We're all going to be eating different foods in the next decade.
Absolutely.
And I look forward to trying the flies.
Absolutely. And some of us already are and begun that new type of diet, and also really diving in deep to these alternative foods. So gentlemen, all thank you very much for sharing your thoughts and insights today. And to your audience, thank you so much for tuning in. If you like what you heard, click subscribe, give us a thumbs up. Do reach out if you'd like to continue the conversation with our investors today here on VCTV. Thank you, Brian, and continuing to talk about marketplaces and food tech. Thank you, Gary. We'd love to have you. And then also entrepreneurs. As each of them mentioned, they're available 24/7, 365 online, and would love to continue the conversation around food and food tech along with marketplaces. Thank you, Julio. So do reach out, make sure you add context. And if you'd like to be on a show like today and get up on the virtual stage, pitch us as investors live, get real-time feedback, and also pitch to our live audience, do reach out to the LA Token team. We'd be happy to find the right opportunity for you. With that, again, thank you everyone so much for your time and insights. And also a big thank you to the LA Token team and Emmanuel for making VCTV possible every single day. With that, I'm your host, Kyle Ellicott. We'll be back here tomorrow. You can find me everywhere online at Kyle Ellicott, and we'll see you back here tomorrow. Take care, everybody.